At my dad's funeral, my sister turned to the crowd and said, "She's been a burden her whole life." Then my grandfather slapped the table and said, "That's not what he told me. She's been a burden her whole life." Those were my sister Raina's exact words, said in front of everyone at my father's funeral. We were in a modest Baptist church in Charlotte, North Carolina, where the funeral service was being held. She stood in heels and a fitted black dress, barely blinking, her voice calm and cold. People turned their heads. A woman in the second pew audibly gasped. I didn't react right away. I couldn't. It was like my brain short-circuited. After all I'd done for our father, after all I'd sacrificed, she had the audacity to throw that in my face in front of everyone. Then my grandfather, our dad's father, stood up, slapped his hand on the wooden pew and said, "That's not what he told me." His voice carried over the entire church. Raina's jaw tightened. Her eyes dropped. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to, but maybe I should explain how we even got there in the first place, because this wasn't just about the funeral. It was about everything that came before it. My name is Eliza. I'm 42 now. I live in Asheville and work as a school librarian. I love books, quiet mornings, and the smell of old paper. I live a pretty quiet life, but quiet doesn't mean uneventful. Raina is my younger sister by 2 years. She lives in Atlanta, works in finance, and if you met her on the street, you'd think she had it all together. Maybe she does, but we couldn't be more different. We grew up in Charlotte, in a small house with pale yellow siding and squeaky floorboards. Dad raised us alone after Mom walked out. I was 10. Raina was 8. I still remember the sound of the front door closing that night. He told us Mom wasn't strong enough to stay. I never really knew what that meant, but it was the kind of thing he said a lot. Dad worked nights at the chemical plant. He tried his best. I know that now. But when I was a kid, it just felt like he was never around. When he was home, he was either asleep or yelling. Never violent, just tired, frustrated, overwhelmed. Then when I was 17, he was gone too. He left us a note on the fridge. "I can't do this anymore, I'm sorry." That was it. Raina cried that night. I didn't. I just went to school the next day like nothing had happened. We were placed with our grandmother at first, Dad's mom. She was strict, quiet, and very religious. Then she died of a stroke 2 years later, and our grandfather, Silas, took us in. Silas was ex-military and ran his house like a drill camp, but he never raised his voice or hand. He just expected order. He made us read the paper at breakfast and watched documentaries with us on the weekends. I resented him at first, but looking back, he probably saved us. I put myself through community college, got a degree in library science, and started working at the local middle school. Raina, always ambitious, went to UNC Chapel Hill on scholarship, then landed a job in finance right after graduation. We both built lives, but we built them in opposite directions. Then, almost 20 years after he left, Dad called me. Out of the blue, he said, "Eliza, it's me, your father, I have cancer." That was the first thing he said, not "How are you?" or "I've missed you." I should have hung up, but I didn't. I don't know why exactly. Maybe I wanted answers. Maybe I still loved him. Maybe it's just who I am, I show up. He'd remarried, had 2 more kids, but they were grown and out of the picture. His second wife had left him shortly after the diagnosis. He was alone, broke, dying, and suddenly very aware of the damage he'd left behind. I offered to take him in. Raina said she couldn't. Too much on her plate, that was fair. She didn't owe him anything. But neither did I, really. Still, I moved him into my guest room and took care of him. I watched a man who once seemed invincible shrink into a shadow. Chemo ravaged his body. Some nights he sobbed like a child, apologizing, reliving memories, sometimes calling out for Mom in his sleep. Other nights he was lucid, remorseful. He told stories I'd never heard before. He remembered my birthday. He said he was proud of me. It was the most painful and intimate thing I'd ever done. And then, after nearly 2 years, he died in his sleep. I called Raina. She booked a flight, arrived the night before the funeral, and said barely a word to me. She hugged me stiffly, told me the hotel was fine, and went to bed early. The next morning, she didn't offer to help with the service or arrangements, just showed up like she was attending a networking event. And then, in front of everyone, she said what she said. She's been a burden her whole life. She went on to say that I had clung to the fantasy of a father who never existed, that I forced a narrative of redemption that made me feel better, not him. She said I was always looking for pity, and that I manipulated guilt into martyrdom. I wanted the floor to open up and swallow me. Every insecurity I had, the way I doubted myself, wondered if I was just clinging to a deadbeat, was being weaponized against me in front of strangers. And then Grandpa Silas stood. "That's not what he told me," he said, sharp and steady. He looked at Raina with more disappointment than anger. "He said Eliza saved him, said she gave him a chance to die like a man, that he wished he'd been the kind of father she became, loyal, kind, forgiving." Raina didn't respond, just stared at the floor, jaw locked. After that, the service wrapped quickly. People avoided eye contact as they filed out. The next day, we had the will reading. Dad had left almost nothing. An old truck, a few personal items, and a joint bank account he'd added my name to quietly. And a letter, just for me. The lawyer handed it to me after the reading. Raina got nothing. I opened it in the parking lot. It was handwritten, shakily. "Eliza, I don't deserve your kindness, but I needed it. You gave me peace at the end. I can't undo what I did, but I can say thank you. I saw the woman you became, and I'm proud. Not because you forgave me, but because you didn't let my mistakes become yours. You were never a burden. You were my salvation. Love, Dad." That's when I cried, really cried. I hadn't since he died. Not until then. Raina and I didn't speak at the will reading. She left without a word. But that night, just before midnight, I saw headlights in my driveway. It was her. She stayed in the car for a long time. I watched from the living room window, debating whether I should go out. Eventually, I opened the door. She looked up. Her face was tired, not angry, just hollow. "You think he loved you more?" she asked. "No," I said quietly. "I think he needed me more, that's different." She nodded. "Maybe." Then she drove away. Raina didn't call after that night, not for weeks. Months, even. I didn't expect her to. Our relationship had always been this volatile mix of silence and sharpness, a pendulum that never quite swung toward warmth. Growing up, we weren't exactly close, not in the way sisters were supposed to be. We survived together. We endured, but closeness requires trust, and that's something we never really built. We had proximity, not intimacy. And still, there was a part of me that kept looking at my phone, that hoped for a message, an apology, something. I hated that I cared. Instead, I buried myself in routine. I went back to work, returned overdue emails, and restocked the shelves at the library. The familiar quiet of the stacks became a balm. The library had always been my sanctuary, predictable, organized, safe. In a world where people disappointed you, books never did. But even surrounded by order, I couldn't stop replaying Raina's words. "She's been a burden her whole life." It wasn't the cruelty of it that haunted me. It was the certainty in her voice. As if she truly believed it. As if she'd been carrying that belief for years and was just waiting for the perfect moment to say it out loud. I started journaling, not for insight, but for sanity. I needed to get the thoughts out of my head, and paper was safer than people. I wrote down everything, memories of Dad, both good and bad. The nights I sat up with him during his treatment. The way he sometimes apologized mid-sentence, as though the guilt was a reflex. I even wrote about the day he left, that stupid fridge note, and how I stared at it until the refrigerator motor hummed and snapped me out of my shock. Writing helped, but it didn't fix the ache. Silas kept coming by once a week like clockwork. Sunday evenings, 5 p.m. sharp. He'd bring over a casserole, always the same kind, tuna with crushed saltines on top, and he'd ask how I was doing without asking directly. That was his way. Sometimes we'd talk about Dad. More often, we wouldn't. One evening, as we were watching an old war documentary, he looked over and said, "You know your father loved both of you." But he wasn't strong enough to face her anger. It took me a second to realize he meant Raina. He said he didn't know how to apologize to her, said she was like a mirror, showed him all the things he hated about himself. I didn't respond. I just let the words settle. It made sense, in a heartbreaking kind of way. Raina had always been the one who demanded answers. She didn't settle for half-truths. She questioned everything. When she was 16, she tried tracking Dad down herself, called old coworkers, wrote letters. When nothing came of it, she turned that anger inward, then outward. She got sharp, guarded. She stopped trusting people, me. I just accepted it, or buried it. I'm not sure which. I guess that was the beginning of our split, not a moment, but a slow divergence in how we coped with abandonment. It was early spring when Raina finally reached out. She sent a short text, "Can we talk?" I stared at it for a long time, then replied, "Sure." She called the next night, no pleasantries, just, "I've been thinking about what happened." I waited. "I don't regret everything I said," she added, "but I regret how I said it." "And where?" I wasn't sure what to say to that. It wasn't an apology, but it was something. "I think I was jealous," she admitted, her voice quieter. "You got something from him I didn't." "You mean closure?" "No, you got peace. You made your peace with him. I wouldn't let myself," she sighed. "And I guess I thought, if I couldn't forgive him, then neither should you, but you did, and it made me feel stupid, weak." That last part stuck with me. I'd never thought of forgiveness as power. For me, it had always felt like surrender. "I didn't forgive him completely," I said. "I just couldn't watch him die alone." There was silence on the other end. Then she asked, "Did he talk about me?" "Not as much as you'd probably like, but when he did, he sounded scared, like he thought you'd never let him explain." "Maybe I wouldn't have," she said. Another pause. "But I wish he'd tried." After that, we talked every couple of weeks. It wasn't warm or easy, but it wasn't hostile anymore either. We were like strangers trying to navigate familiar territory, carefully, clumsily. I told her about the letter. She didn't ask to read it, and I didn't offer. Some things still felt too personal. Meanwhile, life moved on. Silas had a minor fall one morning and needed help getting around for a few weeks. I started visiting him more often, cooking dinners, making sure he took his meds. He hated being fussed over, but he tolerated me. One night, over chicken stew, he said, "Have you ever thought about having kids?" I shook my head. "No one to have them with?" "Doesn't mean you couldn't." "I'm 42, Grandpa," he shrugged. "You've always been the one to carry more than your share. Doesn't mean you can't still build something good." That hit me harder than I expected. I'd never really thought about building anything beyond my job, my home, and the next set of library displays. But his words stayed with me. And so did something else. Raina had told me on the phone that she'd started seeing someone. A man named Marcus. Older, divorced, 2 kids from a previous marriage. "He's not the kind of guy I usually go for," she said, "but he makes me feel safe." I didn't tease her. I just listened. And that was the beginning of something new between us. Not reconciliation, not yet. But the soft start of something less fractured. We weren't the same. We never would be. But maybe, for the first time in our adult lives, we were starting to understand each other. The thing about people like my sister is that they never truly forget a grudge, but they also never forget a slight, especially when they know deep down that it was their own doing. Raina and I continued talking sporadically. Nothing deep, surface-level updates. Weather, work, Marcus. But the funeral had pulled something loose in her, and I could sense she wasn't quite sure what to do with the guilt she didn't know how to name. One evening in early November, about 6 months after Dad's funeral, I got a letter in the mail. A large envelope from a law firm in Atlanta. Inside was a copy of an insurance claim and a letter from the firm explaining that Raina had been named the beneficiary of a small life insurance policy Dad had taken out during his second marriage. He'd never changed the beneficiary, and because Raina was still listed as his emergency contact from years ago, the company had reached out to her. The policy was worth $25,000. A week later, I got a call from Raina. She sounded hesitant, uncertain. "I got something from Dad," she said. "A policy, I didn't expect it." I stayed quiet. "I don't think it's fair, considering everything." "Then do what's fair," I said, simple as that. She said nothing. The money wasn't the point. I didn't need it. But it was the perfect mirror. She had to choose what kind of daughter she wanted to be, even after his death. The daughter is still clinging to bitterness, or the one capable of doing the right thing. 3 days later, I got a wire transfer for half the amount. No note, no explanation, just the money. I took that money and did 2 things with it. First, I donated $5,000 to the hospice center that had helped me care for Dad in his final weeks. The nurses there had treated him with dignity when his body was failing and his mind was unraveling. It felt right to honor them. The second thing I did was for me. I started a program at the school called Second Chapter. It was designed for kids who'd been through family trauma, divorce, abandonment, loss, and needed a quiet space, mentorship, or just someone to talk to. We hosted weekend workshops in the library, wrote letters to people we missed, and even created a little memory wall where students could share stories anonymously. It became one of the most rewarding things I'd ever done, and word got around. About 2 months later, I was invited to speak on a local radio show about the project. Nothing fancy, just a 20-minute segment. But it reached people. And a few weeks after the interview aired, I got a call from a producer at a regional education nonprofit. They wanted to fund the program and expand it to 3 more counties. The check they gave us, $25,000. The exact amount of the policy Raina had received. I never told her. I didn't need to. This was the kind of revenge I believed in. Not dramatic or cruel, just poetic. The kind where the universe gently balances the scales and gives you what you've earned, not what you demanded. Raina didn't take the news well when she found out about the expansion. I only know this because she called me and said, "Saw your name in the paper. You're turning into a regular saint, huh?" I laughed, not unkindly. "No, just doing what I can." She paused. "You're good at that?" "At what?" "Turning pain into something useful." I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything at all. And then she said the one thing I thought I'd never hear from her. "I was wrong. About you, about Dad. About the funeral. I said what I said to hurt you, and it was ugly. I'm sorry." It wasn't flowery, but it was real, and I believed her. A year after Dad's funeral, Raina and I met up in person. No occasion, no crisis. Just coffee in a small shop off Ponce de Leon in Atlanta. She looked the same, polished, self-assured, but something in her posture had softened. We talked for 2 hours. About Dad, about Marcus. About Grandpa Silas, who was still kicking and still refusing to use a walker. We didn't resolve everything. But we didn't have to. Sometimes justice isn't about grand gestures. It's about seeing the arc of pain bend, slowly but surely, into something redemptive. I got my closure, not from an apology or a split inheritance, or even that final dramatic moment in the church. I got it by choosing not to let other people define the value of my love or the worth of what I gave. My revenge was living well, doing good, and walking away from the bitterness that consumed so much of our past. And in the end, maybe that was the best kind of justice.